Well, every Sunday we've been setting aside a portion of our service to look at Bible prophecy, and for today's Bible prophecy update, we're not going to look specifically at Israel or the Middle East because of the week that we had here in the United States of America. I'm sure some of you, if not most of you, are aware that we've had a week of shootings. Of all places, I found this article from the Sydney Morning Herald with the headline reading, 9 Dead in Week of Shootings. A female student shot dead 2 women before turning the gun on herself at a college in Louisiana in the latest deadly episode in a week of shootings. Police in Baton Rouge said that they had found 3 women who had apparently all died from gunshot wounds in a classroom at the college. It appears that one of the deceased is the actual shooter, and she shot 2 other young women inside the classroom, killing both of the young women, killing both of them before turning the gun on herself, said Police Sergeant Don Kelly. Earlier in the week, a gunman opened fire at an Ohio school. He wounded his estranged wife, then killed himself. And in Missouri, a gunman burst into a council meeting and shot 7 people, 5 fatally. This all inside of 1 week. Now, you know what's sad about this? This will be forgotten next week. This will be old news, probably by tomorrow. I suggest to you that we have been so desensitized by the evil and to evil that this is starting to not faze us as perhaps it once had. I'm going to demonstrate this way by reminding you of another shooting that happened not this week, but the previous week. It's already off the radar. Do you remember the Lane Bryant store in Chicago? Multiple victims in Chicago shooting. I suppose you could say that the world is waxing worse and worse and becoming more and more evil by the day, but we just sort of go on with life. It's business as usual. And I think there's a reason for this. It's because we don't value life anymore. Not only do we not value life, but we don't value the giver of life. See, if you believe, as is being taught, that we evolved from animals, then you're going to act like animals. And life is meaningless if we come from animals. There's no value given to life. When our sons and daughters grow up believing that we're from animals and even like animals and not created in the image of God, then we really can't expect them to value life. When our sons and daughters engage in sexual immorality and experience the unwanted pregnancy, it shouldn't really surprise us that they would terminate that life because it's really not a life. And if it was a life, there wouldn't be a value placed on that life. Church, this is a sign of the times. These shootings are a sign of the times. And I believe it is yet another indicator that we are living in the last days. The Apostle Paul describes for Timothy how brutal, rash, treacherous, abusive, and ungodly people will be in the last days. It says in his second letter, chapter 3, verses 1 through 4, he says to this young pastor, "But mark this, there will be terrible times in the last days. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents." Reads like the headlines, doesn't it? "Ungrateful, unholy, without love," or as some translations say it, natural affection. That's the love that a parent has for a child or a child has for a parent. unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of good, treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. One might argue that there have always been brutal murders like these multiple shootings that we experienced this week and also the week prior. But I submit to you that the difference is that they are happening more frequently and with greater intensity. And that should not come as a surprise to us either, because both Jesus and the Apostle Paul as well said that when the Lord returns, it will come at a time likened unto a woman in labor. That these would be like labor pains, Matthew 24. That labor pains that come in shorter frequency and greater intensity. So too are these shootings coming in greater frequency and shorter intensity. And it's likely that it will get worse. And I think that we just continue to become desensitized to it. I think that when we watch television and we watch movies, it really disconnects us from the reality and the enormity of what's taking place. I think it's for this reason that we as believers should interpret weeks like we just had as a sign that we are most certainly living in the last days. Matthew records for us how Jesus rebuked the religious leaders of that day for not discerning last days signs of the times. Matthew's Gospel, chapter 16, verses 2 and 3. This is Jesus replying. He says, "When evening comes, you say it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, today, it will be stormy, for the sky is red and overcast. You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the signs of the times." I think the clarion call to us today is to interpret the signs of the times and to know that our redemption draweth nigh. I believe that the Bible is clear that this is the generation that will see the coming of the Lord, the return of the Lord for His church in what we call the rapture of the church. Again, these recent shootings that claim the lives of multiple victims all within a week are undoubtedly a sign that we are in that generation. There are other signs, not the least of which is when Jesus said that the generation that is alive and witnesses the return of Israel to her land will be the same generation that sees the return of the coming of the Son of Man. Well, again, this is just one of many signs, and we can interpret it to mean that we are that generation as we witness these birth pains, as we witness these things come to pass, as we witness the world becoming more and more evil and waxing worse and worse. Now, I am keenly aware that there are those who would ridicule this and say, every generation has thought that they would be the generation that would see the coming of the Lord and that we're living in the last of days. Do you know that that is by God's design? There is this doctrine of imminency, which we'll talk about, Lord willing, a little bit more next week. But the doctrine of imminency is that the Lord could return at any minute. Any minute, imminent, that's how I like to remember it and understand it. See, when I live with the anticipation and even the expectation that the Lord could come at any time, it has a profound effect on how I live my life.